All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode. episode. I'm not even sure what episode we're on, Ian. Honestly, and I say morning. It's morning for me here on the West Coast. It's about 9 a.m. Ian Cummer is streaming live from Moscow, Russia. It's 8 p.m. in Moscow, Russia at the moment. And we had a topic in mind, and the topic was some changing immigration laws, I think in the US and also in Russia. But let me just hand it over to Ian because he's the expert. He is the resident expert on all things immigration.
Yes, so for our new viewers who haven't seen me before, I am an American citizen who's living in Russia, and right now I am a permanent resident, and it's my resident status right now. I started on a tourist visa. I first came to Russia in 2021, 4 years ago, actually basically almost exactly 4 years ago in December 2021. And on a tourist visa, an American tourist visa to Russia. And I got a couple of years after that, I got my temporary residence. And then just a few months ago, I got my permanent residence. So today I'm going to talk about this new law it's not a law, excuse me, it's an executive order that was just signed by Putin last month. And I'm going to talk about that, how it compares to what President Trump is doing in the USA, and what that means for us residents of the world, citizens of the world. What does this mean for the political situation? So I am going to, if I can remember how to do it, share screen. Okay, here we go. So we're going to share screen. Okay. Can everyone see that? So this is the executive order that was signed, and of course, it wasn't in English. I machine translated the page with Yandex, so our English-speaking audience can roughly understand what it says. So basically, this order signed by President Putin on November 5th. Long story short, what it did was added a requirement for anyone hoping to get a residence visa or citizenship in Russia, and that requirement is you're in the military or were discharged from the military or emergency services. So basically, that means you cannot get a residency or citizenship at all. Just nobody can get. No man between the ages of 18 and 65 can get it unless he serves in the military or related services. Now, what's interesting about, I'm going to stop sharing because everybody's seen it. So what's interesting about that is I've seen basically no coverage of this outside of Russia. I know about it because I'm in Russia. The reason I know about it is because someone I know who is applying for his residency told me that he got turned away because he showed up actually the day after this came into effect. So he showed up November 6th November 5th, and was told, well, this is the law now. We can't take your application. What was interesting about that is I was wondering if this was going to be picked up in the Western media. So they're going to say, oh, look, they're going to force all foreigners to serve in the military, into the meat wave attacks. No, I didn't see any cover. I'm not even sure Western journalists know it happens. I think that's because our Russia experts just scroll Russian news sites on Telegram. And so if the Russian news, like RT or Sputnik or somebody, RIA Novosti or somebody else, or some major news site reports it, and if they don't, they just don't know it happened. I think that was the case here. The news didn't really talk about it too much, as far as I could see. It was just a thing that happened. I don't think CNN or Fox or anybody even knows it happened.
So this executive order basically says, no more permanent residency or pathway to citizenship for foreigners who have not served in the emergency services or the armed forces, right?
Yes, that's the for men.
And
Yes,
you just made it just in time, kind of, right? Because you got yours a couple months ago, and if this order would have came before that, you would have been blocked,
yes. So
ostensibly.
I'm glad I was pushed by some people to not. Oh, good morning to Todd from New Mexico. It's one of our viewers who chimed in. So if you comment, whichever platform you're seeing this on, we can see your comments and we'll say hello to you. But yes, that's correct. So I was encouraged to not procrastinate on my paperwork, and I'm glad I didn't because then I would have missed that cutoff as well. So the main theory on this is that it's aimed, like the USA gets a lot of people from Latin America, Russia tends to get most of their immigrants from the Central Asian republics who were also in the Soviet Union. So there's ex-Soviet Central Asian states, and they get a lot of those immigrants. And of course, just like in the USA, it's kind of controversial. It's like, why do we have so many foreigners coming in? And so the common theory is that this is kind of aimed at them, and of course, obviously, the average person isn't going to want to join the military, so he'll just go home, and that's widely suspected as the motive for this. It's just encouragement for those people to just go home. Now, with that said, well, the issue is that even people who aren't from Central Asia, because it's not, as you saw from that order I displayed, it's not racist. It's actually not even legal. It's not constitutional to make a race-based law or an ethnicity-based law because everybody is equal under the law. But of course, the problem is that affects everybody. Even America, and I think it is it is a rug pull, especially because, as we know, a couple of years ago they did those shared values visas. Um, it aimed at unfriendly countries, which were mostly Western countries. So it can be unfortunate because if a person came here on those and got a temporary residence visa and had not yet gotten a permanent residence visa, now he can't. And that's and just to explain, the temporary residence visa is good for 3 years, but does not renew. So if somebody comes to Russia on a 3-month shared residence visa, that gives him a window to apply for a temporary visa for 3 years, and then after that, apply for a permanent. I'm sorry, it's my dog scratching himself, making noise in the background. Sorry about that. But if
Somebody's
somebody
playing
come
a
here on that
tambourine.
shared visa, now he's kind of, oh my gosh, my dog's noisy. If someone came here on that temporary visa, now he's stuck unless he wants to join the army or be a firefighter. So it is kind of a rug pull. So it's unfortunate for anybody who is caught.
What do you think is the motivating factor?
Well, like I said, I think it's aimed at countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, where they get a lot of the labor migrants, and there's increasing, there's this public dissatisfaction with how many immigrants Russia is taking in. And it's actually not widely known, but Russia, up until a few years ago, was the number 2 country in the world for immigrants. Only the USA took in more immigrants, and which is considerable considering that Russia has less than half the USA's population. It's about 150 million versus 360 million in America. So they're taking close to as many immigrants as the USA even is. And there's just pushback because they come in, they take jobs. It's like, well, they're taking jobs from people who are born here, and of course some of them. Let's be honest, there are people who just want the social services, especially because Russia has a lot of family-oriented benefits. You can get money from the states. You can get maternity capital. You can get, housing assistance and that sort of thing. So of course, people are upset if they see, foreigners coming in and using those services. And so that's, of course, it wasn't directly stated. Like no one in the state Duma is going to stand up and say, "Well, we did it to get rid of those nasty foreigners because we don't want them here." They didn't directly say that, but that's widely considered the reason. It's just there's been a lot, especially after the Crotus City Hall terrorist attack a couple of years ago, and as it turned out, out of the four, I think it was four out of the four guys they arrested for that terrorist attack, none of them were here legally. Like there were a couple with expired visas, a couple who had updated their address. So all out of the four, none of them were actually in compliance with the immigration law. So of course that was a scandal. He's like, why weren't the migration police doing their job? Why didn't they catch and deport these people? And there was. So Russia, just like, in Western countries, has their share of disagreement about immigration and border policies.
Yeah, and I mean, this way they can at least say, if somebody is going to become a permanent citizen of our country, we know at least that they're, giving back, paying their dues, helping our country by, joining the military or the emergency services. So it's interesting, but it's one way to, blunt that criticism that, people are coming in here and they're just, they're taking our healthcare system, our education system. And so they're also giving back, instead of just lowering wages and, extracting from the public services, they're also, providing a service and sacrificing, in either the military or the. So it's interesting. I mean, it's like you said, it's a change. It's a big change, and thankfully you were able to get yours all completed before the change took place. Yeah, I wonder. You wonder. I mean, it's two different things. Like in the United States, they're the owners of the country really don't care about the interests of the working class, so they don't really care what the working class thinks, and so they're happy to just facilitate people to come in here on an illegal basis to to be able to exploit them and depress wages and keep unemployment levels relatively high. But in Russia, it seems they're a little more sensitive and a little more concerned about the perceptions and the views and the how their policies affect the working class, which I think they care about that more in Russia than they do here.
Yeah, and I'd say the big thing is I was, of course, it was very sudden. It was a very sudden change. But I wasn't exactly surprised by it, and it was partially what fueled my decision, which I actually talked about in that previous show, where I was doing a Q&A about just migrating to and living in Russia. It's partly what fueled my decision as well, because even in 2022, I was thinking, well, because of the deteriorating political situation, I bet it's just going to get harder. Or if I do decide later to change my status, it's going to be more difficult to do so. And that is actually what happened. And I've actually had arguments in the past with people. Like I remember this was during Biden, when Biden was still president. There was this right-wing American guy I know on Facebook, and he had made this very silly post. We're basically saying, well, if the USA, doesn't work out, isn't the great, right-wing paradise for us anymore, we can just all move to Russia. And I was telling him even then, it's like, well, it's not going to get easier to come to Russia, right? Especially if people start doing, because when there's just a few Westerners coming to Russia, it's not a big deal. But if like greatly increase the number of people coming to Russia, of course they would get tired of it. People would get tired of it. When you have one guy from America there, it's a novelty. But if you just had your whole neighborhood, it's like, look, there's Americans ruining the neighborhood. I mean, if you have too many people from a certain country, of course they will get tired of it. And I was telling him that it's like, it's not going to get easier. And he was like, he's getting all upset about it. And this was like maybe a couple months after the shared values visa. He's like, well, look at this. And I was telling him, well, the shared values visa, even at the time, I was like, well, I think it's kind of virtue signaling. I feel like it was kind of a Putin virtue signal. Like, oh, we got all of our Western supporters, and it was a virtue signal. It wasn't some intent to radically restructure Russia to be more accommodating to Westerners. That wasn't going to happen. And of course, that's what turned out to be exactly, if that right-wing guy decided he wanted to come to Russia now, well, you'd have to join the army. And actually, we have a comment here we have several comments. I'll try and catch up with them. So Condor the Bird said, why is it not showing on my... Can you display?
Yeah, let me try. Yeah.
I don't know why it's...
When Westerners come to Russia, it's usually a war. That's funny. I mean, it's true. It's true. So, and then Theodoros Ibrahim had some.
That's why I couldn't do it, because I got kicked off. Okay. Yeah. So the thing about so we have this Theodoros commenting. Russians very multicultural already. Well, yes and no. So they do, like, for example, they're about 10% Muslim rather than 1% or less than 1% Muslim, like the USA and most Western countries. But it's very concentrated in those in several different states. Because in the 17th and 18th century, they annexed several regions in the North Caucasus and Central Asia that are predominantly Muslim. So that's where most of the Muslims are. So it's actually, yes, it is. So it's multicultural in the sense that Russians are only about 50% of the population in several regions, but as a whole, it's 80% Russian, probably about the same 90% Christian. So as far as it's not really, it's actually probably less multicultural than the USA. But yes, it is with Theodoros' second comments that the Soviet Union was very big on internationalism. Yes, that is true.
Seems like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Hopefully, it doesn't get any worse.
Yeah, it's
freezing up for me every now and then.
Yeah, hopefully not. But yes, so it is going to get more difficult, I think, to come to. Yes, and Todd saying it has 190 ethnic groups. That's true, but again, we're talking. Most of those ethnic groups are less than 1% of the total. So when we speak of multiculturalism, what's what that typically means is that you have several large groups, and so you have to mitigate, and they're large enough where there's actually conflict between them. So you need a compromise, a system that compromises those groups, so they're not in conflict with each other. But when you have one group that's large enough to maintain a hegemony, and the other groups are just on the periphery, 1, 2, 3% of the population, that's not really multiculturalism, because it's just that one group. It's like, okay, here's our value. I mean, of course they accommodate those other groups. It's and that's usually what happens, especially in modern Western societies, European societies. They accommodate those groups. They don't actively persecute them, but it doesn't make it multiculturalism. It's still this one group largely calling the shots, and the other groups just kind of have to conform.
Yeah, Google tells me 72% of Russians are ethnic Russians. So
Yes.
that's a pretty big majority. I mean, the Han in China are over 90%, I think. So
yes, I mean, I do see some people on the internet tell me that China is multicultural. Well, it's 90% Han's Chinese. I wouldn't call China. I mean, it's true they have ethnic minorities, as does Russia, but it's not. That doesn't make China multicultural in the normal sense.
And so, I mean, and to an extent, like I always make the point that it's when you have a lot of diversity, it's easier for the ownership class to divide and make sure that the working class does not unite around its own working class interests, and it's easy to divide them along ethnic lines, religious lines, cultural lines, and so it's easy for the ownership class to dominate and exploit the countries that are multicultural, and that's one reason why multiculturalism has been pushed, by the ownership class. However, I mean, it's something that we have to overcome. I mean, we have to figure out as a class of workers how to overcome these differences and hold, the ruling class accountable. And it's just very difficult because it's so easy for them to set us at each other's throats. But that's what happens.
So we have a question again from Theodorus. And again, if you guys comment and you just ask a question, we will take those questions sequentially. So this comment from Theodorus is saying he's very worried about a lot of these right-wing American folks moving to Russia because they think it's compatible with their views. How will that affect the possible restoration of communist rule in the future? Well, so that's kind of a two-part question. So one, there's some, I mean, every time there's a presidential election in the USA, the people who lost say they're going to leave, right? When Trump won, or even I can actually remember when Bush won his first election, he's got Democrat people all saying they were going to run away to Canada. Well, how many actually ran away to Canada? And then when Biden won, of course, the right wing people were very upset talking about leaving, for some country they see as more conservative, be it Russia or Hungary. Very few actually did that. Very, very, very few actually packed their bags and left, because it's most people can't just pick up, take their ball and go to a different country. It's very expensive. It's very difficult. You have to integrate into that new country, especially if there's a language barrier. So it's much harder than even just moving from the USA to Britain, for example, because at least they speak English. Those Commonwealth countries speak English. As far as the second part of his statements about communism, well, Russia is capitalist, and so it is also. So Russia is also socialist. It is correct to call Russia a socialist country because they have a lot of industry that what they consider industries of strategic importance, like agriculture, energy, and the military are all completely nationalized, or at least partly nationalized. Like agriculture is partly nationalized, military, defense is completely nationalized, and energy is partly nationalized. But that said, it's not a command economy anymore. It's not a communist system, and there's not really an interest. There's not like this upsurge of public support to go back to the communist system, and it's not realistically ever going to happen. It's they like, because the 1990s were of course very corrupt and it was very bad, but once things calmed down in the early 2000s, they like there's not a demand to go back to the communist system. It's not going to happen. I mean, I think we'll see some more. Maybe you'll see some more socialization. You'll see some more nationalization of certain industries, but you're not going to go back to price controls. The actual, complete nationalization of the means of production. It's not real. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I know that'll disappoint some people. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry.
It's interesting. I'm not sure that is what Ibrahim had in mind. And it's interesting because I always talk about the ideology of communism and socialism and what it means. And it's interesting that you define it, as well. Communism is when we, take all the means of production and abolish the private ownership of them. But of course, China hasn't done that, and China is run by a communist party. And so, what I think Ibrahim is probably talking about, at least what I would assume he's talking about, based on my understanding of communism, is that when the Communist Party takes over and starts running the society specifically in the best interests of the working class, kind of the way China's doing it. And so I think it's an interesting question because obviously, Russia is capitalist. They have capitalists that have influence in the government to a greater extent than, say, China does. And so Putin is kind of a manager, but he also is a nationalist, and capitalists aren't nationalists typically, right? So nationalism and in the interests of the capitalists, can conflict. So Putin's kind of a manager. He's managing all the interests. He's managing the interests of the capitalists, of the working class, the nationalists. And so the primary contradiction that Russia is facing right now, of course, is Western imperialism and Western efforts to overthrow the government and put in a client regime and balkanize the country. So that's the biggest threat they're facing right now. And so the class struggle within Russia is kind of taking a back seat to this more primary contradiction of Russia's survival as a country. So I don't think that we have to necessarily, if the communists take power, the Communist Party take power in Russia, they need to get their shit together. They need to, come up with a platform and explain to people why that what they want is better for Russia than what Putin is doing. And they haven't been able to do that. Putin is a very popular leader. But yeah, I just kind of don't really see, I don't agree that communism is the total abolition of all private property. Like that's
well, imagine, yeah. So as far as some define, if he's referring to more of the party, I think the last chance for the Communist Party to make a comeback would have been in 1996 when Yeltsin was doing such a terrible job. And they had had one financial crisis already. The metros were, full of homeless people. And that was their chance to take back power in the 1996.
We know what happened, right? Because I read.
Well, we know what happened. Yeah, Spinning Boris, if you've heard of that movie with Jeff Goldblum, which was actually kind of an amazing movie. Actually boasting about sending the Harvard boys to Russia and helping Yeltsin steal the election, and Clinton spent $2 billion on keeping Yeltsin in power. But now it's one's kind of a nostalgia party, right? They don't really have. It's not this party that's associated with having a very concrete plan of what Russia needs, and a lot of it's nostalgia because there's people who remember the Soviet Union and feel nostalgia for the Soviet Union, and so they vote for the Communist Party because it has the words communist. And there's actually more than one Communist Party, and it's also unfortunately kind of Western influence. Like if you remember when Navalny was, I forget which election. I guess it was the 2021 election when Navalny was in jail and not even allowed to run in it. And he was telling his supporters to, vote for any party, even vote for the Communist Party, just vote for any party besides United Russia. I think that kind of in of itself shows it wasn't considered an his Western sponsors weren't afraid of the Communist Party as being against their interests. They were fine with it. No, I'm not going to tell that joke. I just read a comment. But Condor of the Birds referring to a rude joke that I'm not going to say here. It's not family friendly. But anyways, to get more back on the topic of immigration, well, okay, so Theodorus, if you're listening, I hope I answered your question. I always ask people after I answer a question. But to get more on the topic of immigration, so that's Russia specifically. I think what we're looking at also is as the globalist system, by the globalist system, I mean this world order, this new world order, as George Bush called it in 1991, which we could define as globalism. There's the Cold War was over, and there was supposed to be more the world was going to be more interconnected than ever, which includes freedom of movement. So ideally, if you had, one world government or even just one world system, you're free to travel or live in wherever you want. You can say, I want to live in France. I want to live in Africa. I want to live in, Russia or wherever. It doesn't matter. And I think I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I think that's actually something that will happen eventually. It'll eventually happen when there's no more world conflicts. But that was a major part of globalism, that there's no Iron Curtain, there's no restrictions on where people can travel. And I think that was actually a selling point for why should people like and support globalism? Well, it's because you'll have complete freedom of movement, and you can travel and live and work wherever you want. But I think as that system breaks down, as individual governments are anti-globalists, and as voters and citizens are anti-globalists and revert more back to nationalists, one country after the other, starting with the big countries, the bigger and affluent countries, are just going to reverse those open borders or relaxed borders that they've had in the 1990s and the 2000s. And I say that, I think that's important to say because I know especially a lot of our audience here is very pro-immigration. There's nothing wrong with being pro-immigration. I mean, I say that as a person who immigrated. I'd be kind of a hypocrite if I say I'm completely against immigration. But I am saying we're going to see less of it. We're going to see, so I think people do need to pick their battles. So I think it's just, picking immigration as the hill to die on, I don't think is a good strategy for any political movement, if I'm making sense. I don't know if Billy Bob, if you want to push back on that at all, but.
I mean, it's interesting to hear, you talk about things, and what's striking to me was that, there is a context, the greatest, most important context within which all these things are taking place. And I mean, the context is clearly that the United States is, their empire, their globalist system is being threatened. And so it's, they're having to adjust to a changing world where they are not the hegemonic unipolar superpower. And we can see the kind of things they're doing, and we can see the kind of how the what is being talked about is changing also. And so it's like there's a cultural shift taking place where things are becoming more heightened and more more so cultural differences are being ramped up at the same time that this big that the United States and these things are interconnected, right? Like I think they go hand in hand. And so the U.S. and their need to adjust and deal with a changing world is it's responsible for, this, the whole immigration crisis that we're talking about. And so, for a long time, it benefited the ruling class to, flood Europe, flood the United States with immigrants, and they were promoting globalism. But when they see that it's no longer benefiting them and they can no longer control it and dominate it, well, they're shifting course. And so they are the ones. It's a top down, inflaming of people's anger and opposition to, these policies that they themselves had implemented just not too long ago. And so it's, again, I'm a big proponent. Like, I think that, it's great to have people of diverse backgrounds in the same place where we can learn from each other and appreciate each other's cultures and things like that. But it also makes it very easy to cause division and to exploit that situation, to keep us from uniting and holding them accountable. And so that's kind of what they're doing. They're inflaming the divisiveness. And I was wondering, I don't know if you ever saw the whole, Piers Morgan interviewed what's that guy's name that everybody's talking
Nick
about?
Fuentes. Before you get into Nick Fuentes,
Yeah.
I want to bring up this last comment mentioned about the Romans traveling around the empire. But they might be upset if Judea or Britannia decided to make it multipolar. So I think actually Rome is a good example of what you were just talking about, Billy Bob, because I forget there's a Latin word for it. I don't remember what it is, Chris, because I don't know Latin. But the Romans had a specific word for what they would, for the citizenship they would give conquered people. So if they would basically defeat and annex a new city-state, they would give the adults, I guess the adult men, a citizenship that basically granted them all the same rights as a Roman, except the right to vote. That was the only right they didn't have. They'd have all the other rights. And this was a way to peacefully Romanize those people, right? Because you're not suppressing them or saying, you're a third-rate person. They just, they take their their middle class, their merchants and their landowners, all those people who control the society, and make them Roman citizens. Another practice Romans would do is hostage exchanges. So you would send basically your sons to Rome to be political hostages, and they would send some of their people to be political hostages in your city. And of course, that would encourage good behavior because those hostages would be killed if there was a war. But also, it was also Romanization, because when those sons returned, they would be Romans, basically, because they spent years in Rome and become Romanified. So that is basically their equivalent of globalism back then. How an empire, just on a smaller scale, it's imperialism. It's how Rome, and so I think it's actually, when you compare, say, an ethno-state or a normal nation state, and what's the difference between a normal nation state and an empire? Well, an empire is actually less racist and more tolerant to a degree, and it's non-violent. It has to have a mindset where if you just hate everyone who's different from you, you can't run. It's impossible to have an empire, right? Because an empire means you're ruling people who are different than you, so you have to some extent, get along with those people. So I think when you compare, why did this country have an empire but this other country didn't? And if you look at that second country that failed to build an empire, they're extremely kind of xenophobic and racist, and they don't like anybody who's different from them. Well, you can kind of see why they never had an empire, because they don't get along with anybody else. So it's like, you can even look at, for example, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's like, okay, how come Russia had this big empire and Poland just got smaller and smaller over time? Well, you can kind of see you know, because Poland's policy was Polonification, forced Polonification. They would it was only the Polish, you know, it's the Polish way or the highway, right? They didn't really want non-Poles to have rights or to have an equal status in Poland. So you kind of see that was hindering their ability to expand, like Russia did. But yeah, so you wanted to bring up the racism and immigration and Hitler debate with Piers and Nick Fuentes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of think that you know, it's the whole, you know, move towards nationalism away from globalism. It's like a pivot, right? It's like a top-down shifting of you know, the you know, how the ruling class wants people to think. And so they were pushing the globalism. They were pushing multiculturalism. And now, I mean, we see that that's changing, that's pivoting. And why is that changing and pivoting? Because, you know, what they were pushing, that system is no longer working for them. They're no longer able to control it and benefit from it as they were. And so there's a new way of going, you know, a future that they're looking towards to deal with these threats. And so I think, you know, we haven't really even seen. So we're kind of seeing it this morning, you know, and yesterday morning with the United States, you know, saying, you know, we're going to just, you know, stop all shipping from Venezuela, and we're going to use our Navy around the world to, you know, to benefit the United States. And so if you have something we want, we're just going to take it. And we have the military power to do it. We have the Navy. So it's like this nationalism. It's a retrenching in the, you know, the Americas, Fortress America, to just, you know, ensure that we are in the best position to have this big, large global conflict with, you know, Russia, China, Iran. And so these smaller countries that are intransigent, we're just going to roll over them and take their stuff. And, you know, we don't care. But it's, you know, it's all in preparation for this big confrontation. And as part of this big confrontation is also the shift in culture and the rise of, you know, nationalism, anti-immigrants, anti-immigration, and really just this new, you know, I don't know. It's just a break. It's a break with the liberal past that was being pushed for so long. So I'm not sure how much sense that makes, but it's kind of what I see, you know, taking place. And I don't know. I think Nick Fuentes is interesting because, you know, it's just a break with the traditional thing. And there's a reason I think he's being promoted is because, you know, they're trying to you know, just like prepare people for a different way of existence than we've known, you know, my 50 years on the planet. You know, it's like, hey, get ready, because life as you know it is not ever gonna, you know, return. It's, you know, that we're gonna enter into these new paradigms that are totally different than what, you know, the paradigm that we've been indoctrinated into, you know, for the last 50 years. Anyway, no, I think I'm kind of rambling a little bit.
No,
but
I think you brought up what you mentioned, the Venezuela, the tanker to Cuba. Now, that really made the news. It got a lot of attention, though it's not the first time, because the USA has been doing this kind of piracy thing for a while against these countries that they say are quote unquote sanctions, like Cuba. So Cuba has this terrible energy crisis. I mean, their economy's a mess. I mean, Cuba is just in very bad states right now, and part of it is because they have these blackouts due to lack of fuel. And the reason they have a lack of fuel is when people try to send them fuel, like Venezuela did, the USA stops the tanker. So it's one of those. Well, you know, look at, you know, they say communism is bad because Cuba is poor. It's like, well, why is Cuba poor? Well, because it's basically under an embargo. since
Well,
1950.
I think we're going to see an escalation, right? We're going to see an escalatory effort to overthrow Venezuela, overthrow Cuba. There's a buildup of forces in that area. I mean, Puerto Rico, they're expanding the military base there, and Trump is, directly told, hey, Colombia, you're next. After we take care of Maduro, we're coming for you, Petro, or whatever the guy's name is in Colombia.
I think I wanted to bring it up because because the Venezuela thing's got a lot of attention. Though I think what's going to have longer and bigger longer lasting and bigger implications is actually the Ukrainian strikes on those African freighters in the Black Sea. And I think because the USA has been a dick doing that shit for decades, though I think the actual because in World War II you had unrestricted submarine warfare, right? And it wasn't just Germany; the Allies did it too. The USA had unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan. I think there was actually, I'm pretty sure, I don't know that for a fact, but I think it was in the Black Sea and the Baltics. It was also unrestricted. If you see an enemy flagged ship, you would, or even any ship that's that's supplying the other side, you would sink it. But since World War II, we've had this idea of, even after World War II, we had this idea of just global commerce. And nobody has the right to sink third-party ships, right? It's fine if you're at war with somebody, you sink their ships. Okay, it's one thing, but sinking neutral ships that were not participating in a military way, I mean, that's that pretty consistent standard since the end of World War II, and that's what's really kept the global economy afloat. That's there's just unrestricted trades.
Yeah,
but that's kind of, you can see how Ukraine's kind of testing. I'm sure there are NATO sponsors behind it, are testing the waters because they sunk these African, because they didn't sink a Chinese ship going to one of those terminals, because of course that would have serious consequences if they'd sunk a Chinese flagship. But they sunk one of these African ships, and they kind of figure, well, okay, no one's going to care because it's one of those little countries that doesn't really have any power on the global stage, and there's going to be no consequences. But we can see, I'm sure it's going to have consequences in Kazakhstan because it's their oil also. And the USA has been trying for a while to get Kazakhstan on their sides. But also, if they're like, okay, well, Ukraine's allowed to sink whoever they want, well, I think it's this taboo against sinking ships is just going to go out the window, because even Yemen kind of got away, because Yemen's like, okay, we're going to restrict shipping to Israel, and of course we bombed the hell out of them, but didn't really stop them either. And then you have this Ukraine doubling down and saying, well, we're going to start sinking ships. Well, I think in the near future we're going to see a breakdown in international trade. It's going to, when you got the formation of blocks, and people outside that block can be expected to be bombed by somebody when they're
that's that's one way of saying what I was saying. So I agree with that, and it's going to be the new normal. And the whole point is, we're starting it, we're implementing it, we're practicing it against Venezuela, against Russia and their ghost fleet. But of course, this is all to be used against China. Like this is the elephant in the room, and this is this is why the Marine Corps has been specifically re-engineered to get rid of their armor component and to be a mobile anti-shipping missile force for the past 2 decades. So this isn't coming out of the blue. It's we're seeing systematically this agenda and this approach being rolled out. And the context is, China is the peer competitor. So yeah, we're not sinking Chinese shipping at the moment, but we're normalizing this. And the whole point is, at some point we will confront China and we will threaten them. And like, hey, how we're, sinking shipping for Venezuela and Iran and Russia, we can do that to you too. I mean, we've put in the places that there's the first island chain, the second island chain around China, and at the snap of our fingers we can implement that. So this is the new normal, and yeah, global shipping, free trade, all that is a thing of the past. And so along with this shift, though, is a shift against liberalism, against basic principles of justice, fairness, sovereignty, respect for sovereignty. I mean, this is the liberal order that never really existed, but they gave lip service to it. And now that lip service is becoming untenable because what they need to do is so at odds with the lip service. And so they're just shifting people's, perceptions, and no longer is, things like justice or, international law or, respect for the sovereignty of other countries going to be something promoted as a value, as an American value. I mean, it's changing.
I think it's going to hurt. I mean, I don't know how much of this is deliberate policy, but it's going to hurt USA and Western countries also, because it's not a blue water navy per se, right? Because traditionally only a few countries could afford a large blue water navy that could interdict shipping. But these Ukrainian attacks were done with naval drones, and anybody can afford a naval drone. So this monopoly on only a few world powers being able to interdict shipping. Well, now anybody who can spend a few $1,000 on a naval drone can interdict international shipping. I do think within a few years, we're going to see some major consequences of that, because I mean, what is stopping any smaller country from saying, well, I'm upset for whatever reason, I'm just going to, use some, and they don't need to take credit for it. If you just have some drones that hit a ship and nobody takes credit for the attack, who you're going to even know? There's not necessarily even a definitive way to know who is responsible for it.
For sure. And I mean, of course, I would say that the West is expecting that, and they're counting on it, and they're embracing it. That there's going to be instances where their own shipping is attacked or mysteriously blows up, and that's the world that they want. They are the ones creating that.
Idea of perspective. I'm just not sure that. I just don't think they've thought it through. Because just imagine how different the world would be if we just did not. Because I'm not saying every single ship gets sunk. Just enough ships get sunk that drives up insurance rates, that makes it no longer cheap because of the liability and the risk of ships being sunk. What does insurance rates to the cost?
Yeah, no. Hence the need for Fortress America and to control our sphere of influence.
Just even your own life. Just think how fundamentally different it would be if you couldn't get, Temu or or even just oranges. Just all this cheap. Just everything being cheap, and just anywhere from you can get some T-shirts from or electronics from China, or some fruit from the Indo-Pacific or Latin America, because on the assumption that it's just cheap and unrestricted shipping across the ocean. But if that goes away, we're back to the 19th century, where you might not have pineapples in winter because they couldn't load pineapples on a ship and send them to you cheaply. Or you can get pineapples, but they're several times more expensive because of the liability, and the insurance rates went up. If you see what I'm saying here.
No, I see what you're saying, and I think you're saying that you don't think they thought about that, and I'm saying, of course, they thought about that. That's going to be the new normal.
I don't think that benefits them. It does not benefit Western. Because that will hurt China, that will hurt Russia. But we're talking about countries that have a land border. They can continue. They don't need ships to trade with each other. The USA does. Britain does. Australia does. Those are the countries that are going to be hurting. Well, even Central Europe does, because they're shipping.
Right, and I mean, we see that the United States is more and more not caring about Europe. and that, seeing Europe as, just really talking bad about Europe. So no, I think I agree. Europe is going to suffer. Europe's not going to be happy with this, and that's why we're trying to tell Europe, hey, Europe, you need to get on your own 2 feet. You need to start investing in your military. The world's going to change, and we're not going to be there supporting you. And so again, and that's why we're gonna, take over Central and South America. That's why we want to. That's why we want Greenland and Canada and Mexico and Venezuela, because we want unfettered access to the resources in our hemisphere, because we're not going to be getting them from China, because there's going to be an embargo, and there's going to be this global shipping that we've taken for granted is going to come to an end. But again, this is the response. This is the Western response to their loss of hegemony, and the rise of China and the rise of Russia not being able to control and dominate the system. We're kind of messing up the board, and we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to play a different game then, because we're obviously not going to win this one. So we're going to play a new game now. Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying, but I mean, there's a lot of questions, right? Like, I mean, can they even do it? Can they accomplish it? I mean, it seems like if they want to, they can, because they can, they have the power to disrupt the global system if they want to. But we haven't seen a lot yet. We've only seen the very beginning of it. And again, so it's a lot of speculation on my part. I mean, we're only at the very, very beginning of this kind of thing that I'm thinking is the actual plan. But I don't know. We can see there's a lot of reason and evidence and justifications for my point of view, especially with, all the things that they've done to encircle China. Like, they've been preparing for decades for this. And, and now to see these things being implemented more and more, the past couple days, like, it all is headed in one direction. And so, I'm definitely extrapolating from certain things, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of justification to think that, this is the direction we're headed. But okay. I feel
to recap, I mean, that is the direct. We're seeing an end of this global, like you said, the end of this global order. Which encompasses immigration, right? It's not the freedom of movement that we have associated with the past 20, 30 years has come to an end, or is coming to an end on multiple fronts, and we're possibly seeing the end of unrestricted, unmolested, let's say, unmolested international shipping. I think we're even seeing even the financial system is threatened if we look at what's happening in Belgium right now. For this latest round of arguments about the frozen Russian funds, Belgium is saying, and the story I saw this morning, I haven't researched it thoroughly enough, but with the story I saw this morning gave a different explanation from what I've seen. So most people are familiar with the main story was that they want to give not just the interest, but the principal of those Russian assets to Ukraine as a loan. And Belgium's pushing, which has the majority of that, is pushing back, saying, no, we don't want to do that. The story that I saw this morning was that the reason is because Belgium was arguing that if Russia takes them to court and wins, Belgium, which is a small country, not many, organic assets, would be ordered to pay it back. And so they were saying, so the story I saw this morning was saying, Belgium initially floated, we are willing to do it if other European countries share the liability. with us, right? And those other countries that are pushing Belgium to release those funds said, well, no, we don't. And so it's interesting. You have these other much larger countries like France and Germany pushing little Belgium to release these funds, saying, well, you're a traitor and a Russian asset if you won't release the funds. But they're also saying we won't share the liability with you, the consequences of sharing those funds either. So it's interesting.
If we're to talk about that in the context that we've been discussing, it seems a no-brainer that at some point they will seize those funds, because that'll just be a further break with the international order that we've known and experienced our entire lives. And so if what I'm saying is true, where we're entering a totally new paradigm, it just seems like a no-brainer that at some point they're going to seize those funds and they're going to be happy to have that break with the pre-existing order. Shoot, I was going to say.
Well, I would say yes. So I think the unification of Europe was the biggest feather in the cap of globalism, because European peoples are not, just a bunch of white people. It's not some big hegemonic entity, right? If you look at European history, it's dozens of countries that have been in perpetual conflict with each other for centuries. So the end of the Cold War and the formation of the European Union was one of the biggest successes in globalism in history, because you have all these countries that have been constant, millions and billions and millions and millions of people have been killed in wars in Europe, and just by itself in Europe.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, we're actually a big happy family. We're, all these different nations of people, different languages and different cultures are all coming together as one big happy family. And now the European Union specifically is under attack, which is interesting. The USA specifically has seen it as a competitor. We've talked about it. I've blogged about it before. The USA sees the European Union as a competitor, which makes sense, because if the European Union and Russia joined forces and were just one economic bloc, it would be the largest and strongest economic bloc in the world. There'd be nobody else that could even touch them, right? If you had Russia's energy and resources and land mass versus Europe's population density, and just how just their urban development and manufacturing, it would be really unstoppable. But so the first step was to split them. Was that period of Putinist rapprochement, saying, we're gonna kiss and make up, all of our differences, Germans and Russians are best friends now. We have Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 and all this. And so breaking that up was a huge American, and I'd say British, because I'm sure they're on the same page as the USA as far as breaking it up. They broke that up. And now it seems like the next step is to break up the European Union itself. There's that news that Trump's
So the USA wants to achieve the withdrawal of Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland from the European Union. This is stated by the publication Defense One, citing an unpublished version of the U.S. national security strategy, which was privately sent to journalists. So, if they're not really interested in doing this, they're definitely interested in putting out propaganda to make it sound like they are interested. So, to me,
right.
no,
So
I think
it was released intentionally, of course, because these leaks are never an accident.
Right.
And they intentionally. What's interesting about that, though, is as soon as I saw that news, I thought of Boris Johnson, because it's interesting. It's not even talked about. No one made this comparison. But 3 years ago, in 2022, when Boris Johnson was briefly prime minister, he floated the idea of this Eastern European Union. That was, and he directly described it as not just a wedge against Russia, but also a wedge against the European Union. So it's a wedge against Germans and Russia centered in Poland. So now, 3 years later, Trump, and I'm sure it did not pop up in Trump's brain independently. I'm sure this is
right.
It's a London this idea materialized in London, and it manifested itself. It's appeared again.
Well, it's a think tank. It's these think tanks.
Boris Johnson was a head of state when he said Trump is a head of state. I think it's something we should take. I don't think it's a bluff. I think it's something to take seriously, and it's one of those. And it's like throwing shit at a wall to see if something sticks. So I don't see Austria. I don't see Austria doing it. But, I mean, Poland has a lot of conflict with Germany. And they've been under a lot of pressure to comply with their very liberal agenda when it comes to immigration and culture and human rights. It is a very liberal agenda, and Poland likes getting that money, but they don't like the woke. It's like so they'll take woke German money, but they don't like woke German politics. So, if I had to guess, I feel like they're offering Poland. Poland's kind of like, and Poland really lately hasn't gotten any money either. That subsidization that's greatly increased Poland's GDP is basically gone. They're not really getting. From what I understand, the last couple of years, that most of those handouts have been suspended. They're not really getting anything from Germany, from the European Union anymore. So this might be a case of Britain and the USA gives them a better offer. It's like, if you withdraw from the European Union, we'll give you a better deal than what Germany is giving you. And if one country accepts that, this might be a case of, like with the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union broke up because Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, the presidents had illegally assembled, and those three people are what caused the Soviet Union to collapse. This might be something similar here. You make this proposal to a bunch of different countries. One of them accepts it. Then maybe, for example, Italy says, well, maybe we'll take that deal too. And then several countries do it, and then it's over. There's
Yeah, so they definitely have a vision that they're pursuing. The Western oligarchs who are the shot callers and those who control Western imperialism. They have a vision, and definitely in that vision, the EU is going to suffer and probably change considerably from what it currently is. And it's relatively new. I mean, the EU hasn't even been around for that long anyway, but and then the US as well. And so again, you're just not going to cause the harm to China that you need to cause without also suffering yourselves. And so they are, the West is resigned to the fact that we are going to sacrifice. We have to sacrifice. There's no winning without sacrifice. And they are adamant that they're going to engage in a conflict and win. They're going to try. And as part of that conflict, it necessarily comes sacrifice. And so the EU is going to be big sacrificers. They're going to try and, placate, and they're going to try and keep the people in the United States from sacrificing too much. And that's why, we have to take over Venezuela's oil, so we can have access to all that oil, and help alleviate the pain for certain people that we, deem to be our allies. And so we're going to control the energy, to a point, but, so it's interesting that, and I don't want to even mention this guy, Peter Zeihan, because he's been a China-phobe. He's been a China-phobe, and all these predictions about China's imminent collapse, but basically he's quite popular on the YouTubes. But he actually kind of was also describing this future where it's like, spheres of influence. It's like city-states, regional city-states. And, the globalism is gone. There's not going to be any of the globalism. There's not going to be the free shipping. It's going to be, whatever you can secure in your geographic region, while you are making war and making unsecure other regions. And there's going to be regional blocks. The EU is still going to be a regional block of, further, trying to cause the same kind of harm to other blocks while, securing themselves from being harmed themselves. And that's just the future. I mean, it's going to be a Cold War, only even less cold than the Cold War. It's going to be a little bit warmer than the Cold War.
So for viewers who don't know, Peter Zeihan is a political commentator. He was with Stratfor back when Stratfor was big. He's been around for, I guess, since the 1990s. He's been active for a while. And most of his career, he's been predicting the imminent collapse of China. So it's been
true.
A couple of decades of him.
No, and he thinks that this new system that China's definitely gonna be the big loser in this new system. But he was describing it, and I'm paraphrasing as best I can. But it seems to be the vision that they're slowly pursuing. So it's called strategic sequencing, right? So not everything happens at once. These things are being rolled out strategically, but we can see the progression and we can see the trajectory of where we're headed. And so, when we're thinking about, well, what is going on? What does it all mean? This is how I kind of understand it and put everything together is, we're making a break with the liberal world order, the globalism, everything that, comprised the Western values after World War II. All that's going out the window. We're gonna engage in a new conflict, and then hopefully we're gonna come out of that conflict, and we'll have a new normal, and we'll shift back to liberalism again, and the rule of law. But right now, the rule of law is not on our side, so we're gonna say fuck you to the rule of law, and we're gonna just engage in power politics, power dynamics, and we're gonna have to bring pain to these other countries, and we're gonna have to sacrifice and accept pain ourselves, but we're gonna prevail, and on the other side we'll be in a much better position, and then we'll go back to promoting the rule of law. I don't know. That's what's gonna happen. That could be a 20-year thing. It could be longer. It could be shorter. But I mean, life as we know it it's not gonna it's gonna be, things are gonna be different, and it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet, but I think it's the inevitable trajectory that they're pushing us on, and it's their choice. They're the ones pushing this, they're the ones choosing this, and it's their vision they're pursuing. Russia doesn't want it, China doesn't want it, humanity doesn't want it, the working class in the West doesn't want it, but it's the elites, it's the wealthy elites, it's the ownership class, it's the owners of the Western Empire who are seeing their power and control recede, and they're not going to put up with it. They're not going to tolerate that. Anyway, Ian, you're a good listener. I'm sorry. Yeah, I feel bad.
No, you're fine. It's good to not just be me talking. It's good to have an active co-participant here. But it's interesting what you were saying, and it's it does connect to our initial point of immigration, freedom of movement, and the collapse of this globalist system. Actually, this morning I saw a clip from Tucker Carlson. Actually, he was talking about, and it's something he's repeated before. Was that just if you just look at the situation pragmatically, Russia is a very good ally for the USA, right? If you just look at terms of size and strength and natural resources, Russia would be a very good partner for the USA, right? If you need someone with energy, you need someone with just large land mass and a large military. Like if there was a war, and he's bringing up even if you just had a hypothetical war against, a third country, Russia's a place that, one has a large military of its own, and it just has, you can potentially, put your military there, to have this joint thing or whatever. He's going on for several minutes about this, and what made me think is that, it's just, because he's right, from a common sense perspective, this unraveling of the globalist system doesn't make any sense, because Russia is not anti-globalist. Putin and the Russian government are not anti-globalists. They're not against the system. They wanted to be part of the system. I think this is the same for China. They wanted to be part of the system. Iran wanted to be part of the system, and that's why they kept this softball negotiation, long after they should have, because they wanted to be part of this international system. It's like, what do you want from us? We can exchange something, but since you have the system, and there's nothing actually wrong with this system. There was nothing going wrong with the system. It just spontaneously exploded. It's just surreal, because you have that crazy Estonian woman. What's that Estonian woman's name? Maybe someone in the
Kalas or
whatever her name is, and she's the European Union's like foreign whatever minister, and she's always ranting, like she's like, Russia has not ever been invaded in the past 100 years. It's like, it's just crazy. It's like you have Russia, which is willing and very interested in being an ally of Europe and the USA, but we can't because there's these crazy Estonian women who hates Russia. So it's like, you're going to take Estonia with this population of, do you even have a full million people now? 1 million people doesn't like Russia. So we're going to be Russia's enemy, because, it's just, it's
yeah, crazy. I mean, it's interesting too. I mean, all those countries, the Baltics and Finland, I mean, it was all part of Russia. And the only reason they became independent was because there was a civil war. And then the West, got these countries to, reject Russia in favor of, embracing the Western capitalism. And but that's a different issue. But yeah, before 1917, those were, the Baltic states and Finland were all just part of the Russian empire. So what you're describing again is, what I was trying to say earlier. There's a game. Everybody wants to play the game, and the United States, the West, realizes it's not going to win, and so it just messes up the game. And it doesn't just happen spontaneously for no reason. I mean, this is a decision by the West, and they have a vision for a different game they want to play, but it doesn't just okay. And the other thing is, I mean, the context within which the United States is trying to be nice to Russia is because they want to ally with Russia against China. I don't think Putin is dumb enough to do that, but I think he is smart enough to lead the West on and say, yeah, let's be friends, let's be bros. Of course, when push, when they actually tell him, okay, well, now it's time to start doing something bad to China, he's probably not going to do it. But he's gonna be all about, being good friends with the West and with the United States. But the only reason the United States is pushing that agenda instead of the one under Clinton and Biden and Obama, where Russia was the big evil, was because we realize we can't militarily or economically destroy them. And so the next best thing would be to peel them off and make them as an ally against China. But again, I don't think that's possible. I think that's a failing strategy too. So ultimately, the West is going to have to deal with a Russia and China that is relatively united against these efforts by the West to redraw the global map and change the old game and create this new game where they're feel like they're in a better position. But yeah, China and Russia are happy to play this liberal game where we respect international law, respect for sovereignty. That was, again, never really existed. Like it existed for other countries, but the U.S. never abided by the laws. It was always the U.S. is going to do what we want to do, but we're going to hold everybody else accountable to our international law. And even that system was going to be preferable to the system that the United States is going to be creating. But China, China would be more than happy to continue doing what they're doing. But that's the thing. The whole point of all of this is that the U.S. is no longer able to control everything and do everything with the impunity they used to because of China. And so China is the reason that the United States is wrecking the game board and creating a new paradigm. But they would love to peel Putin away from Xi and enlist Putin as the next proxy against China. I mean, imagine if they did that. Then they'd have the first island chain, the second island chain, and they would have Russia. Like, China would be totally isolated, and they could, cut off all their commerce like that. Do that for 6 months, their economy collapses, the government's in turmoil. I mean, these are the pipe dreams of these Western academics and the think tanks, and this is what's driving. And they're selling this to the owners, to the billionaires, and the billionaires say, "Yeah, we're going to do that. Do it." And we're seeing it. We're seeing it roll out. It's not going to succeed. It's gonna cause so many problems, and the West is going to continue to, it's only going to accelerate the West decline. That's what's going to happen. China's not going to suffer like the U.S. is. I mean, we even see with the sanctions. Remember the sanctions? Trump is going to get China with these sanctions. Man, that did not work out well. China's exports have increased. They've just bypassed the U.S. as a destination. I mean, they've just increased to all these other countries. But it's so obvious what I'm saying, and everybody on the planet kind of understands this, and that's why it's not going to work, because people aren't going to appreciate, the United States plunging humanity into a catastrophe for no good fucking reason. And it's going to play out in the next few years, maybe months.
We'll see. We have a good audience tonight. I'm actually pleased. We have a good audience tonight. Billy Bob and I were talking about this before the show. We didn't market this show as well as we could have, so I was having some Facebook difficulties. I was wondering how it is going to play out. Oh, there's Christine. Hi, Christine.
I want to encourage people, like, if you feel moved to argue with us or jump on the stream and share your opinion, like, we should have mentioned that at the very beginning of the show. We did not, but we're always up for encouraging other voices, either in agreement or dissension. And if you don't want to jump on the stream, you can always just register a comment. But we didn't at the beginning. I meant to kind of invite and encourage audience participation more, because that's it's really makes it more interesting for all of us. But I don't know. I ranted a lot, and I had some pent up stuff because we haven't been streaming as regularly, and so I did have a lot of ranting to do. But I appreciate your tolerance, Ian, and we are an hour and 25 minutes in, and we did have a pretty good participation. I mean, we had some good viewership.
Yeah, so I think this week, at some point in the next couple of days, I'm going to do a test stream because it's a Western platform, I have to use VPN, and I don't know why I have to do that. But I'm going to try to do a live stream from outside my broadband internet, and just see if it works. And if it works, I'm going to potentially do some live streams from the actual sites here, so I can actually make that interesting for us. I can actually go to some of our cultural sites here and do some live streams for us. But so that'll be coming up in a couple days.
I'd like you to go to the gas station and show me those long
lines.
Right,
yeah. So the line of people trading vodka for gasoline. Yes, I can do that for you guys.
Pouring vodka right in their tanks.
Yes, pouring vodka into their tanks, paying with cigarettes at the till. Yes, I can do that for you. But yes, looks like, do we have anything else? Our audience, our wonderful audience, our very large audience of 1,000 viewers, simultaneous viewers. Anything else for us? Otherwise,
yeah, no. I wish. I kind of exasperated myself with my ranting. And yeah, I haven't had breakfast yet either. But no, I look forward to those lives. You mentioned that before. I look forward to seeing if we can stream outdoors and maybe you can, be in various iconic cultural places would be cool. Yeah. There's audience participation would be would be great to get some like dissenting opinions. I would like some dissenting opinions, just to that way, because it helps me to respond to other perspectives and things. And so we got a lot planned. I mean, with debates and or live streams from outside of your flat. Those are all good ideas. But shall we wrap it up? Because I see we do have a lot of viewers, but they're not
other viewers are just quiet now. I think everybody's waiting for us to wrap it up. So it's been a good show. And we will catch you next time.
Yes. Okay, so next week. So I think maybe we'll shoot for Tuesday if possible.
Yeah, so let's shoot for Tuesday. We'll shoot for Tuesday. We'll come up with something. We'll put up the announcements in the next couple days of our Tuesday show at the same time.
That's a deal. That's a plan. We will see you then. Right. Thank you very much.